I've had a lot of people come to me and say, what do I do? I have this young guy who's all gung-ho about AI, who's out there running with scissors. He just connected to our customer data. He's got, big hands in the form of AI right now, where he can try a lot of different things. And he's super irritated at the people who want to slow down. And so I have conflict on my team. How do I deal with that?
Welcome to the Thinking Straight podcast. I am your host, Jason Griffin, and today I am joined by Erika Lenz. Erika has spent 2 decades at the intersection of technology and the humans who build it. Today, she is the founder of KeepYourMind.ai, where she coaches her clients on developing AI critical literacy. She's also the founder and principal consultant of Kinetic Change, helping businesses build real in-house AI capabilities without long-term vendor lock-in. Beyond her client work, Erika co-leads the human-centered AI meetup group and serves on the board of Agile Denver. She's also a startup founder and AI-assisted builder in her own right and outside of tech, an avid social dancer, and a published poet. So quite the resume. Erika, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. So I thought we'd open up with a question about the human experience. So I would say far more than any other technological change, certainly that I've seen in my lifetime, AI's implications really can feel bewildering. There's this crazy mix of feeling empowered and having these magical experiences with AI combined with feeling like totally confused and terrified sometimes about where this is all going and what it implies. How are you and the individuals that you work with attempting to navigate this kind of messy and confusing human experience of this transformation?
Yeah, I love that you use the word bewildered because it's such an emotional word. And I think that a lot of this navigation comes down to these very subjective human experiences that individual people are happening in individual moments. Because I think my observation is that there's no coherent experience happening. Ethan Mollick talks about the jagged frontier that we're in, and I think I experience that jagged frontier on a personal basis maybe daily. And when I'm working with clients, there's a whole lot of stuff that's involved around AI adoption. It's not just about using the tools, although there's a lot of complexity there. There are a lot of conversations I'm having with people about how do they deal with the messy human stuff that's happening on their teams as they're pulling AI in. So you ask how we're navigating, and I think it's we're winging it day by day and trying to figure out how to keep our feet on the ground as we're working with this marvelous, charming sociopath, which is how I describe the LLMs.
I love that. Yeah, and that jagged edge, I definitely feel that. Like you said daily, I thought you were going to say probably hourly or minute by minute is my experience with that. It's
Sure.
like so crazy to me how sometimes it can just be like phenomenally good at things that maybe you wouldn't expect it to be good at. And then things that you might think would be a layup for it, it just sort of falls flat. And that can be a really disorienting experience. But beyond that, like you said, there's also all of these very real human considerations that go into how this technology is impacting business and the employees that work within these businesses. Mm-hmm. I know you're very involved in this term I'm hearing more and more of, which is like human-centered AI, trying to push out AI in a way that's human-centric. What does that term mean to you? And can you give practical examples of what it looks like to take a more human-centered approach to AI?
So I want to back up a little bit because I think my career in software product development has been human-centered. And so this is a continuation of years of working in technical environments with a focus on humans. And so human-centered means starting with the human first. And this is a kind of intentional friction that I put into place when working with organizations, because organizations tend to be looking at AI as an efficiency tool. We want to make more for less effort and have ROI on the other side of that. And there's not a consideration of what's happening with the humans in that particular way of aiming at the work. But what anybody who's worked in software for any length of time knows is that it's almost always a human problem that you need to solve, whether that's people learning the tool and learning skills or people having political battles. And so I start with thinking about the subjective human experience and apply that to more concrete things like workflows. How are we operationalizing XYZ? How are we teaching people the skills that are needed? And I hope we can get into talking about the skills that are most needed for using AI effectively right now, because it's not about tool usage. It's about cognitive stances that you put into play when you're working with it. So starting with the human is about acknowledging that the human is part of any technical system, and that we have to deal with the messy aspects of humanity in order to create functioning technical systems. However much we want to replace everybody with AI, it's not likely to happen, and the human components are very much at play in AI adoptions right now.
Yeah, the point you made about I consider myself very lucky to work at a company that is taking, I think, a very thoughtful approach to AI. Yes, like most businesses out there, we're leaning in and trying to figure out how we can use this as a tool to drive better results for the business and better serve our customers. But we're very deliberate about trying not to take the approach of just foisting AI on the team and saying, you have to use this, and we want to see more output and more efficiency. Go figure it out, right? And I think is maybe like I'm a big fan of like learning by opposite. So would you say that method that got a lot of friends who work at very big companies that are unfortunately taking that approach, and I've heard a lot of horror stories about it. Would you say that's like the opposite of a human-centered approach, or is that an oversimplification?
I think it's just denial. Yes, you're not focusing on the human, but I think you're really missing the point, which is that we are still limited by the constraints of human cognition. We're still limited by just raw energy that people can put into working with the tools. And the aspects of human judgment that are turning out to be very important in the implementation of AI is a very big, messy space because there's all sorts of cognitive biases at play. There's whatever level of critical thinking training and abilities somebody has at any given moment. And there's very subjective perceptions about whether or not we're any good at judging the output that come into play as well. And those are all, in my mind, key aspects of workflows. We often think about workflows as just the technical piece, but as long as there have been workflows, there's been a human in that workflow somewhere, a human in the loop. And so with AI, there's now a more complex level of human in the loop that we need to account for. And so if we're talking about, just get more work done, we're completely ignoring the fact that we're asking that of messy humans. So I use this phrase messy humans a lot in my coaching because I have a background in behavior and psychology and social psychology. And I've also coached a lot of different types of groups over a lot of different contexts. And the human behavior piece of it is so central to technology. And we don't talk about it enough because the organizations that are failing right now, and there's the latest stat I saw was that 95% of AI adoptions have failed to generate the kind of ROI that they were hoping for. And we're seeing a lot of organizations that are rolling back their use of AI, and they're putting constraints on it because there was some unnamed company that spent, $500 million in a month on tokens. There are some pretty catastrophic situations coming up, and that comes from saying just, okay, humans, run with it, do everything you can do, generate as much as you can, without doing the very manual work before you're bringing the tools in of looking at your workflows, identifying what kind of outcomes you want, figuring out how to map your processes in order to accomplish those outcomes, and including the humans in the mix about how you're going to do that.
Yeah, I loved your description there of thinking of workflows more holistically. There's a book actually was written in the 80s called The Goal. I don't know if you've read it, but I read it
a long time
years ago, and have actually been thinking about picking it up again, and I've been recommending it to some people. And the basic idea for those who haven't read it is that it's centered around this concept of the theory of constraints. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to think about this or build an intuition for it is to think about like an assembly line, a factory floor, and widgets are being built on this factory floor, right? And there's a bunch of different points at which work is being done. And at any given time, there's going to be at least one point on that assembly line that's like your rate limiting factor. And you cannot output work faster than your rate limiting factor. That's the rate determining step. And ultimately, the whole idea of the theory of constraints is if you address that bottleneck, then all you succeed in doing is moving the bottleneck somewhere else. There's always a constraint. And I think that's a really useful thing to think about in the world of AI, because a really simple example is people look at the power of AI to develop code and build software and build features. And it's like, well, why can't we just go build everything that we want now? And it's like, well, because the real workflow of shipping software, by the way, to say nothing of like good software that people actually want to use and that is performant and supportable and all that. But just the act of building software involves more than just developing code. And at some point in that workflow, you're going to run into a human who needs to either engage with the software and use it, or market it, or QA it, or any of these other number of things that can go into that workflow. And so I think as leaders in business, we have to really remember that like AI we talked about that jagged edge earlier, and where one other area where that applies is like it can be phenomenally good at helping certain parts of that workflow, but you have to think about the whole thing holistically, including, I think to your point, the messy humans that are involved in it.
Well, and a part that often gets left out in these conversations about flow of work is distribution to customers and actually having customers use the thing. So I've seen this pattern generally in individuals who are running off and vibe coding their new software product, where they build something that perhaps is useful, but they don't get it in front of customers. And so they have failed. They've put a lot of effort into building the thing and no one's using it. So I think there's a version of that happening in organizations as well. There's a lot of focus on the internal processes. And some organizations are pulling AI in to help with market research and marketing and data analytics that they're getting from customers using it. But some of them have not done that piece and they're just focusing on software. And so you've got this engine creating a whole lot of stuff, features, and code that is not ending up in the hands of customers yet. And so that's the ROI piece, of course, and also the feedback piece. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are frameworks that are popping up, frameworks of skills, essentially, skills and attached scripts that are intended to replace all of the processes in the software development lifecycle. One of them is called BMAD, and that's the one I've poked around with. And it's fascinating because you can go in and trigger one of these skills and say, I want to do a brainstorm on an idea. So you pull your CEO in and you have a brainstorm, and it generates a bunch of content that then pours into the next skill, which is about making a product brief. And it does its thing. And there's a lot of good thinking that's gone into it. These are not poorly executed skills, and it's open source, so people can play with it. But it gets you on this this kind of conveyor belt of starting from whatever content you're putting into it, and then it just starts building and building and building, and very quickly moves to writing user stories that are then built by maybe actual people, maybe agents, maybe a combination thereof. and then it moves into user testing, and then it moves into, QA's in there too, skipped over that. But there's not anything at the end about distribution and getting it into the hands of customers. And so we're building these machines for development that are, if we look at it from the standpoint of a full value stream, are missing the important beginning and end points, which I think is fascinating. And I've worked a lot in organizations of pretty much all sizes talking about value streams and how you are actually flowing value from customer request all the way to customer hands. And everything in between. I should have turned those off.
And some fireworks too.
Let me turn that off. It's too fun. We're having conversations that look very familiar to me pre-AI, where we are not, as organizations, we're not quite able to get our brains around the whole picture. And we have all of this energy to move and produce and deliver. So we're not slowing down and having those deeper conversations about what does the value stream actually look like. And when you get into value stream mapping or process mapping or workflow mapping and optimization, it's a lot of slow, dirty work that involves talking to people about how they actually work. And if you're doing a good job of it, you're actually tracing a piece of work through the workflow so that you can see all the assumptions you've made and all the things you've forgotten to write down in your aspirational workflow, so that you're working with the actual details of your system so that you can start to optimize in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So I think those patterns that have been going on in software for as long as software's been being produced are just playing out again here with AI, and it's amplified. And so we're seeing some bigger, more catastrophic kind of failures because people aren't slowing down and looking at that system.
Yeah. I think your point about distribution is a good one. A founder friend of mine posted on LinkedIn the other day about, to the effect, I'm paraphrasing heavily, but it was essentially, there's a lot of dialogue going on right now about how the engineering bottleneck has been removed, but all that's done is created a new bottleneck in terms of whatever, product discovery or QA or whatever. Like there's a bunch of these. But his point was actually the real bottleneck is customer attention. And I think that's really interesting, because if you imagine a hypothetical world where you as a company are able to figure out how to lift all of those bottlenecks and go magically build everything you've ever wanted to build, well, if you figure that out, guess what? That means your competitors are probably going to figure it out as well. And now you've got all of these companies just shipping tons and tons of features. And lo and behold, there's just another bottleneck now, which is your consumer's ability to digest all of this new stuff that is flying at them, which I think we're already seeing. So it's a really fascinating landscape. But I'd love to zoom out from that, shift gears a little bit, and talk about, you alluded to this before, I mentioned it in the intro, this concept of judgment and how important it is in the age of AI. I would argue increasingly important. You have a term you use called AI critical literacy. Tell us what that term means to you.
Yeah, AI critical literacy as a field, I mean, it's pretty broadly spread across academia right now. There are a lot of people thinking about how AI impacts us socially and cognitively, and of course environmentally, and in terms of organizational behavior and development and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of really good thinking happening in that space. And the core question of AI critical literacy is, should we use AI? And if so, how and when? That is distinct from other terms that are floating around, AI fluency and AI literacy without the word critical. I mean, these terms mean a lot of different things to different people because we're still playing with them. But AI fluency, as taught by, say, Anthropic, is a framework for helping people use the tools more effectively. And so they presume AI use. And it reads like corporate L&D training, learning and development training. So the intent is to train your people how to use AI. And a part of what I remind myself of when I look at this distinction is that this is training by Anthropic, and Anthropic is building a product that is designed for engagement, to increase our engagement, and to have us burning more tokens. And so there is this underlying motivation behind the AI fluency training that I think is important to note. And that said, it's good training. I mean, they have a framework that has 4 Ds in it: delegation, description, discernment, and diligence. And the idea is that you make smarter choices about when to use AI, and that you think about how to effectively communicate with it. That's the description piece. So there's a lot of specification skill buried in that. And discernment, which is about judgment, sometimes we call that taste. Do people have the taste to be able to discern if output is high quality or not? And then diligence is about using AI responsibly. But in AI critical literacy circles, there's a deeper conversation happening. Part of it is about understanding the nuances of what AI use does to us cognitively and emotionally and socially. And there's significant research coming out indicating that it does in fact impact us, and that there are effects like deskilling that are measurable for people who are using AI. And some of that research is with software developers. Some of that research is in medical contexts where they've got AI helping look at scans to look for cancer, for instance. And so the reason I'm shifting my focus to really center on critical literacy is that it's obvious to me, after using these tools for several years and engaging with a lot of different people who are using these tools, that human cognition and how we are thinking and feeling about the tools, it absolutely impacts our success with them. So some of what I do is teach people, and you were at my class last night, and I was really pleased that you were there, just simple pairs of prompts that very quickly reveal the bias in the outputs that we're getting from AI. And this bias is largely invisible when we're using it, because our charming sociopath is producing something that is confident and polished, and it does it incredibly quickly. And so it's very easy to just swallow that whole. Especially when it compliments us about how smart we are as we're working with it. And of course, we all want that. And I have not trained mine not to do that, because I'm aware that it keeps me motivated. So there's this careful balancing act that we're all going to need to do in order to keep using these things effectively and generating really good outcomes. Because we're dealing with a probabilistic, non-deterministic tool. And so that's part of what we love about it, is that it can have a conversation with us just effortlessly. And it can respond to little things, little nuances that we have in what we're asking of it. And it's fast and beautiful. But it's really useful to use these pairs of prompts to see that, the first time it gives you an answer, if you ask it to then look at it from the perspective of a critic, to have an adversarial kind of conversation with it, it will give you a completely different answer, and probably create some cognitive dissonance for you, rather than the frictionless, easy experience.
Yeah.
So for me, the more that I look at this, the more I think this is the game, is figuring out how to navigate this space. And we need to figure out how to navigate it together. Mm-hmm. We need to train people how to navigate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so critical. I enjoyed the workshop that you put on, and I especially liked, going through that exercise. And I've done these kinds of things. I've been working with AI heavily for years, but I think for anybody who's a little bit newer to this, especially, I think it was useful for anybody, but especially somebody who is newer to AI. Like, I was thinking about my kids and like how I think they absolutely need to learn how to use AI responsibly. And I think one of the great things that you laid out in that workshop that I would encourage anyone to do is to go in and say, hey, pick an idea or some political debate that's out there or something that's happening in your community, whatever it is, and go in and, take a stance on it and tell Claude, tell me why this is a good idea. And note how it'll come back, and it'll, of course, tell you how brilliant you are and how your idea is so wonderful. And then just immediately turn around and say, tell me why it's a bad idea. And just note how confident and plausible and, just polished both of those arguments are, right? And then you read both, and you can just see how, like, it will tell you exactly what you want to hear. If you're not, cognizant of that, that can be quite, that can have serious implications. So one of the things that I've done, that I've gotten in the habit of doing with AI, is when I'm in any sort of important conversation and I know that the stakes of this decision, I do a lot of strategy work, for example, and I know that the stakes of this decision that I'm trying to make are high, I am very deliberate about telling whatever AI I'm working with, consider this from multiple angles. Please present multiple sides of the argument. Give me the bull and the bear case for this. And in my humble opinion, I think that's one of the most important skills that anybody using AI can harness, because ultimately, if it picks up on any indication that you're excited about some angle or some aspect of an idea, I have found that it will latch onto that and just run with it and immediately convince you how smart your idea is. And you have to be very careful about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've specifically trained these models to do that. And we have to remember that they are trained to human preference. And so some of that is making us feel good. And again, that this is a product designed for engagement. And so we have to manage that as we go. And I love what you're describing. It sounds like you're even more rigorous than I am sometimes, because I'm more of a creative type, and I'll just go be sloppy and have a good time with it. But there's another piece to this that I think we need to be talking about more, and that's the issue around accountability and ownership of the outputs. So even in the strategic work that you're describing, where you're asking it to take care of all the different angles, there are some decisions happening under the hood that may or may not be visible to you. There are assumptions made under the hood that may or may not be visible to you. And you're a pretty savvy user, so you're probably poking around and looking for these things and bringing decades of experience to it. So you have all of this expert knowledge that allows you to pattern match and look for nuance and make intuitive decisions that are actually based on pretty significant experience. When we're talking about, your average person in a corporation using AI to produce something, if we tell them that they are accountable for that AI output, I think that part of that accountability is understanding how decisions are getting made and what assumptions are going into the conversation. And so if we're asking for accountability, we're also asking for a high level of cognitive activity and sophistication. And so the question is, how do we get people there? Because most people are not functioning at that level on a daily basis at work.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, where companies are looking at AI as a sort of an ends and not a means to an end, right? They're saying, like, here's AI, go do more. And so you have people on the receiving end of that who are being told both of these things. You need to produce more, and you're also still accountable for the quality of that output. And that just doesn't compute, because that goes back to that theory of constraints idea. So I think it's really incumbent upon leaders and businesses to be savvy enough to understand this. And it's one of the things that I believe is that in order for companies to adopt this successfully, the leaders and managers in the company have to be down in the weeds applying AI to the needs of the business with their hands on the keyboard to really develop that deep intuition of, like, okay, this is magical and super powerful in ways, but it's not a silver bullet.
Yes, I agree. And I think I hope that we can tend more to the people managers out there who are dealing with a lot of different behaviors that are coming up on their teams. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, what do I do? I have this young guy who's all gung-ho about AI, who's out there running with scissors. He just connected to our customer data. And that's not cool. Even though he signed something that he wouldn't do that, he's just curious and letting that play out. And he's got, big hands in the form of AI right now, where he can try a lot of different things. And he's super irritated at the people, his teammates, who want to slow down. And so I have conflict on my team now. How do I deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to be training our people managers, as long as we still have humans in our organizations, which I anticipate will be true for a very long time. We're not going to have this kind of mythical replacement of all the people by AI. There's just too much work around using AI. It's different work, but we need people who are specifying and judging and making sure that the outputs are hitting our business outcomes. All of those very nuanced things that right now we can't trust AI to do. Maybe in 5 years we will, but we can't right now. Yeah. So we still have people, and we have this rapid change that's happening, and we have all sorts of behavior happening as a result of that. And so we need to be supporting our people leaders to know how to help develop their people, because the patterns they've been using in the past are probably insufficient. We can't just send people out for a certification and have them come back and sort things out together. I think there's a real need for more conscious curation of people's cognitive skills now. And nobody wants to hear me say that. I'm not popular when I say this because this is slow, messy human work.
Yeah,
but
we're
I think
right
it's
back to where we
absolutely
started,
imperative.
Right? The humans, yeah. The humans matter, as it turns out. You mentioned that there's still a lot of human involvement in using AI. I strongly agree with that. You mentioned that it's a different type of work. I also strongly agree with that. And you've talked about the concept of de-skilling. So there is research out there. I've looked at it too. None of it I found particularly surprising. Is that basically it's like if you're not using a muscle, the muscle atrophies. So if you're not using your brain to engage in certain types of work anymore, that part of your brain is going to atrophy. You're going to lose those skills, especially if they're not like deeply embedded and you're not finding other ways to practice them. So ultimately, my question though is, how do you think about that? Because in some sense, there may be skills that truly just aren't as important anymore, like getting in and writing code line by line. I know developers who are like craftsmen and artists, and they like being in there and writing code because that's enjoyable to them. And I totally get that. I think it would be hard to argue, though, in my opinion, that the skill of actually going in and writing code line by line is becoming less important. Now, you could argue about the slope of that curve, and there's a lot of nuance involved to what type of code are you writing and so forth. So I know I'm making a very broad statement there. But my question is, like, how do you think about, are there skills that are truly becoming less important? Like, nobody that I know knows how to use an abacus, right? Like, that's just not something we really do anymore. And so that used to be a really important skill. Now it's not. How do you think about that in the age of AI?
I don't have a definitive answer to this because I think it's very rapidly evolving. But I think let's talk about software a minute, because there are some interesting patterns. The people who are succeeding at using AI in their software practice are senior developers who have internalized design patterns and internalized thinking about architecture and how to test effectively and what kind of potential gotchas there are buried in the code base. They're people with a lot of context and a lot of tacit skill. And they, I believe, intuitively, which again is based on deep experience, are deciding where to apply the AI. And so they tend to pick tasks that are more controlled, and that fit in their larger systemic view of what's happening. And to get that kind of systemic view as a software engineer takes time. It takes years of experience. And you can see this if you work with software engineers a lot, like the difference between a junior and a senior is, night and day and factor of 100 or 1,000 in terms of their capability to think about the technical problems at hand. And then you have the mid-level folks who are learning and, generally a little full of themselves. And part of their development needs to be that they take a stab at something and then they get cuffed, right?
Yeah.
Like by someone who's senior, who's like, you're not thinking about this correctly. And that's part of the human learning process around it. So, the process of writing code line by line it's not, the lines of code are not important. It's the thinking around creating those lines of code in a particular design system or architecture with a particular set of business problems that you're trying to solve. And so I believe that we can consciously leverage AI to help us learn, to help us develop taste, to help us understand better how to think systemically. But it needs to be something that we engage in consciously, because it's not going to give it to us. It's going to solve all the things for us, and it will solve it in a way that it thinks is best. And so part of what I'm trying to, so I coach both organizations and individuals. And what I'm saying to individuals right now is that the organizations you work for are not really concerned about your long-term professional development. They're too focused on what to do with this new technology. They're not thinking about your brain, which is why this new program that I'm spinning up is called Keep Your Mind. And it really is aimed at helping people own their own professional development in this context, because you can't expect the organizations to take care of it for you. Mm-hmm. So there are little things you can do that can help with this. One of them is, if you're worried about deskilling, one of them is to practice the skill intentionally once a month. So if you're using AI for generating content, write the content on your own once a month and remember what that's like. Remember and observe yourself as you do it. What thinking am I putting into place here? I'm also encouraging people to keep a journal of what's happening. What kind of decisions did you make? And I have a skill, I call it my dead reckoning skill, because it's about navigating in uncharted waters. And I use it at the end of any significant conversation that I've had, and it asks questions like, what choices were made? What were the decisions that were made along the way? And who made them? Was it you or the AI? What level of engagement did I have with it? Was I just giving it a thumbs up every time it produced something? Or was I pushing back? Did the AI push back on me? And so I'm tracking my own cognition over time, because I think it's going to matter in a couple of years. And I also suggest things like, if you are using it for content creation or writing code or whatever you're asking it to do a rough, dirty first draft on your own. And often for me, that will be just pulling up the voice version on my phone. I go on a walk with my dog, and I start the first draft. I do a lot of writing, and so I'll have it listen to me about whatever stories I'm telling and whatever my opinion is. And so that is capturing my initial content and context in the chat. Then I can come back to my computer, switch to text, and have it start to do whatever skills I have around writing. And the cognitive state you're in when you do that, instead of saying, please write a rough draft for me, is you've already done a lot of the work about what the shape of it is supposed to be. And so you're watching how it responds to you rather than you responding to it. And I think if you play with that, you'll find that you're in a really different mental state when you do that, and that you get much better outputs at the end.
I think that's a great point. There's so much there I'd love to react to. I think, first of all, your pushback on the idea that like writing code is becoming a less valuable skill was insightful, because ultimately, like, yes, you could make the argument I made, which is that writing the lines of code in and of itself is becoming less valuable. But the broader point there is that you have to take a bigger view, because it's not necessarily just about writing the lines of code. It's about what that teaches you in terms of the structure of the code and how things work with each other and how that plays into this bigger picture. So I think like that helps me reframe this idea of like, first of all, I agree with you. We don't actually know which skills are becoming less important because this is all just such a fundamental change that's happening so quickly that it's quite difficult actually to anticipate which skills are indeed going to become less valuable and more valuable. And then the other point about like stepping back sometimes and just doing a task without AI. I do this sometimes. I found myself just doing it sort of because maybe there's this deep intuition that like it's just good for me to like do that sometimes. But I've also had experiences where I've sat down to try to use AI to try to accomplish a task that for whatever reason it's just failing at. Maybe I'm just not giving it the right context that day, or there's just something about the nature of the task that I thought AI was going to be helpful, but it turns out it wasn't. And I have to be honest, as a self-aware person who tries to practice a lot of introspection, that in those moments I find myself really frustrated. Like there's already this expectation that like, no, it should be able to do this. And now I'm like inconvenienced and put out because I have to sit down and spend the cognitive energy myself figuring this out. When pre-AI, this was the type of task that I spent all day doing, right? And now I'm just like annoyed that AI won't do it for me. So it's very interesting. And I think it's good that you're calling that out.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting conversation happening around friction. Some of it is coming from psychology circles. I don't know if you're familiar with Esther Perel, but she's a psychotherapist who's become a thought leader, and you can listen to her sessions online. She has some really wonderful content on the importance of friction in both human learning and human relationships. And what AI is designed to do is to remove friction. Of course, we've been talking about removing friction in product development for a long time. You want your product to be easy to buy, easy to use, and difficult to unsubscribe from. So you put your friction in intentional places in your product so that you retain subscribers. AI removes friction at such a profoundly greater extent than any other product I can think of. But the problem is that we need friction to learn. I mean, there's plenty of cognitive science indicating that to learn, it has to be hard if you want it to stick. And we certainly need to be able to tolerate friction to have healthy relationships with other humans. And so there's a very interesting thread about people who have relationships with their chatbots. And you can see very clearly when you listen to them talk and you start to dig into it that the thing they're enjoying is having an effortless relationship with something where, there's no friction. There's literally no friction either because it's disembodied, but there's it's kind, it wants to please you, it'll call you what you want it to call you, it's infinitely patient, and will listen to you prattle on for a long time, which is one of the things I use it for because I process verbally. But we need to be really aware of that. And so part of the protection of your own cognitive skills is to introduce friction intentionally at certain points. And so the irritation that you felt at it not doing it right because you were used to the idea that it would just do it for you like that, that's a warning signal. And so I would drop to a deeper place and get really conscious about really intentional about, am I going to hand this over to the AI? And if the answer is yes, this is worth it, then cool. You've probably found a skill that you no longer need. But you better hope the power doesn't go out.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about, and I do think that bringing this kind of awareness and dialogue to the space is so important. So I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing here. As we're running up on our time here, I want to close out with a big question for you, which is just, you're out there, you got your hands on the technology, you're talking to a lot of people in different contexts. How optimistic or pessimistic are you about business at large, like overall business's ability to successfully navigate this transformation? And by successful, I mean to do it in a way that delivers flourishing for humans and doesn't, put us all out of jobs and end up in a, catastrophic outcome for society, right? Like, business plays a huge role in our society's ability to function. How do you see this playing out?
I try not to play futurist, but I have faith in two forces. One is capitalism. If they don't figure it out, they're going to go under, right? There's a big punctuated equilibrium, to use an evolution term, going on right now. And I do think that there will be some natural selection happening that we can't quite see yet. But as more companies figure it out, and some companies are figuring this out, large and small, they're going to outcompete the companies that are floundering around this. So, cool. Customers will, or the lack of customers will exert whatever pressure that exerts. Cool. I think it'll self-correct. The other force I have a lot of faith in is the human spirit. We are a remarkably, sometimes dysfunctionally resilient species. We continue to exceed our carrying capacity on the planet in remarkable ways. We're trying to, off ourselves, environmentally speaking, and when it hasn't happened yet, we still manage to survive. And I also think that I actually take a lot of encouragement from the backlash that we're seeing right now, the people who don't want to use it at all. I think I encourage those people to work with it, but to bring their skepticism into the work, because I'm not encouraging anybody to not use it. It is happening, and whether or not we want it to, it's going to be a central part of our lives moving forward. But I like that people are pushing back and questioning and being skeptical. The folks who are 100% in and all hype all day are not thinking critically. So we need the skeptics to help set an example for us about thinking critically, and we need them to ask the hard questions, even if sometimes they're obnoxious about it, right? We need that conversation to happen socially. And I believe that humans will sort it out amongst ourselves about what the right level of use is. I encourage us all to pay attention to the 50% of Americans who do not use it at all, and to think about what their lives are like and how this is going to impact them. I think we have a social contract that we need to honor, and it's very easy in tech circles to forget about those folks. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to remind us that they're there and they will be impacted. And with all of our smarts and skill and all of the wonderful things that we're learning playing around with these tools, we can make a big difference if we reach outside of our tech bubble and play in larger circles.
Yeah,
we have a lot to teach people.
I think that's really well said, and it echoes some of my belief, and one of the reasons I'm motivated to do this show is that I just believe fundamentally that with AI, the genie's out of the bottle. The genie's not going back into the bottle, and I think that the more thoughtful, good-hearted people we can bring into the space who are trying to use it for the right reasons and push the ball down the field in ways that do enable human flourishing, the better the outcome can be. The outcome is not preordained. The decisions that we're making right now as a society and as a tech community are going to influence that outcome. And so ultimately, big fan of the work that you're doing to push things in a positive direction, and really appreciate you taking some time to come on the show here with me. For anybody who is listening who might want to connect with you and learn more about your work or just continue the conversation, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Probably the best way is to go to erikalenz.com. That is my portfolio site, and it points at all the various experiments I'm running right now. Or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm very active on there and will respond quickly. So please do reach out. I'm looking for allies and more conversations in this space. And I'm very curious, so I'll be glad to hear your story, whatever it is.
Excellent. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you again so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. All right. Take care.